and welcome to this edition of How To with Seeto. Today, we're going to be talking about using generative AI in your business. I'm Mark Ridley, and I'm one of the founders of Seeto. I'm joined backstage by my co-founder and Seeto's managing director, Laurene Hamilton. Hey, Laurene.
Hello.
Also joining us today is Phil Saldana Bailey, Seeto's head of security operations.
Hi.
I know that some of you in the audience today know about Seeto, but for those of you who are being introduced to us for the first time, let me give you a very brief introduction. Seeto specializes in supporting smaller but typically rapidly growing companies, often in higher compliance industries, with their business technology. By that, I mean the collaboration tools that you and your teams use every day, whether it's Microsoft Office or Google Workspace, whether you use Mac or Windows laptops, Slack or Teams. Seeto specializes in helping the teams inside your businesses experience the highest levels of productivity, employee experience, and security from your workplace tools. But enough about us. Let's talk about generative AI and what it means for you. We're going to talk today in non-technical terms as far as we can about what generative AI is, what that term means, about how it differs from other AI technologies that you may have heard about, how people are using it today in their businesses, but also about how you can roll this out responsibly in your business. So let's get started. One of the things that we did in researching for this webinar is looked at the surveys and the information that is available about how people are adopting AI in their businesses. A global survey by McKinsey that was run this year says that organizations are reporting that 65% of companies are regularly using AI. From our experience in Seeto, that number seems a little bit optimistic. When we speak with organizations, what we tend to find is that people are curious but unsure about how to get started. What was really interesting about the McKinsey figures is not just that 65% of people are claiming to use AI, but the rate and the speed that it's growing. We also see that there's a really marked difference in how AI is being adopted by different departments and different roles inside organizations. We found, looking at McKinsey's research, that marketing and then product and service teams and then tech teams are the biggest adopters. You might be surprised to see marketing as being one of the earliest adopters, but from our experience, marketing typically are one of the teams inside the organization that are really good at finding new technologies that they believe will help them do their job better. So that's perhaps not surprising that McKinsey found that marketing were adopting faster than even your technical teams. One of the other things, even if you're not seeing adoption inside your business, and if we believe that those figures are maybe a little bit optimistic, it's also true that people seem to be using AI much more in their own work. And in the McKinsey study looked at this as well. What they found is that there's a significant increase year on year of people claiming that they would regularly use the technology at work, use generative AI at work, but also a growth in the number of people that were using it for work and outside of work. Perhaps most surprisingly, 15% of people who were born between 81 and 1996, that would be millennials, regularly use it for work. But an even greater number, 34% of Gen X, that's people born between 1965 and 1980, use it for work and outside work. So regardless of whether you are already using Gen AI in your business today or not, or you believe you are, it's likely that it is actually happening. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by generative AI. And there is a lot of magic and mystery around what that term means. We hear AI used a lot. Today, we're going to be talking particularly about a type of AI called generative AI. Generative AI has a number of different subsections, one of which are large language models. And that is actually the area that we're really going to be focusing on today primarily. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about how large language models work in hopefully very simple terms. But it's useful to acknowledge that there are these other types of generative AI that are out there. The difference between generative AI and things like machine learning or data science that you may have come across before is that generative AI can create content rather than being able to do analytics, things like clustering and regressions and mathematical tools. Generative AI can create brand new content. Often that's text, but it can also be used to create images and audio. That audio could be songs, or it could even be duplicating real voices. We're also seeing recently that video, very convincing video, is being created by generative AI as well. And we're not going to talk about the nefarious uses of generative AI, but more about how it can be useful inside your business. So useful to remember, generative AI is a broad term for a type of machine learning that can create content. And we're going to talk about large language models, which are things like ChatGPT, which you've probably seen and maybe played with yourselves. I'm just very, very quickly going to explain a little bit about how large language models work, because this is important to some of the conversations that we'll have later. The first thing to know about large language models is that use of the word large at the beginning is really, really important. Large language models are exactly that. They are extremely large. They have been fed an enormous amount of information. The original models for ChatGPT were trained on the content of Wikipedia and taking the content of large libraries to train the models that underlie the technology that we use today. When we talk about the models, what they actually do is they break that text that they have been trained on into a set of numbers that can actually be represented in space. Now, this space isn't space as we would think about it. It's actually very large space with many, many, many dimensions. But this is really important because what large language models do is they find proximity of concepts. So when they're understanding the words, they find the proximity of concepts to other concepts. If I give you an example of how that works, when you give an input to a large language model, something like how does GenAI work, what the large language model does is takes those words. It is actually much more complex than this, but broadly it takes those words and it tries to understand what the meaning of that sentence is. When it's done that, so it might understand that GenAI is a particular concept, what it will do is it will look inside its database of knowledge and it will try to find words and concepts that are similar to GenAI in order to put together a reasonable, probable response to the input that you're giving it. And so in this case, if you ask, how does GenAI work? What will happen is it will give a response something like generative AI or GenAI refers to ... Something that's really significant about the way that generative AI works is that unlike more traditional computing, it is probabilistic, not deterministic. And those long words are really important to what we're going to look at today. With something like Excel, when you run a computer program, what typically happened was you could be sure of what the output was going to be. But because of the way that large language models work, they work on a what's the most probable outcome, depending on exactly what you've given it, with some randomness inside the answer. And this can make them slightly untrustworthy. It's led to them being accused of hallucinating, which is not a bad term, but it means that we have to use attention and caution when we are actually using large language models in our work, just to watch out for whether the answer that it's giving us is truthful or believable. But we're not going to dig deep into any more of the technology. Instead, what we're going to do is talk about the most popular tools on the market. Today, we're not going to be talking about how you can build generative AI applications. We're going to be talking about how you can empower your staff, your team members, with tools that are on the market today in safe and responsible ways. So the tools that we're going to be talking about are ChatGPT, which was obviously the earliest example of a large language model that was readily available to the public, but also Microsoft Copilot, Google's Gemini, and Claude from Anthropic. All of these are models which do broadly the same thing. And we're going to talk a little bit and see examples next of how they can actually be used to do jobs in the workplace today. We're going to now see a bunch of my favorite examples of how you might actually use generative AI in your workflow. And what we've done in creating this is taken a selection of different workflows, of different situations inside a business, and had a look at how you might go about using generative AI. Up first, we're actually going to ask in this case, ChatGPT, for help with interview questions. First, I ask it in a scene setting way, do you know what a STAR interview is? So for those familiar with STAR interviews, that's a particular structured form for interviewing someone for a job, which asks for a situation, a task, an action, and a result. It's a really good way of interviewing. So we've asked it, do you know best practice for interviewing? Now we're asking it, could you please help write me 5-star interview questions for an HR manager role? I know there are some HR managers in the audience today, so here is an example set of hopefully well-structured questions that ChatGPT is giving us back that would be suitable to ask an HR manager. So this can be used to help build up your question bank. I wouldn't take these verbatim and ask them straight away, but I would potentially take answers from this, put them into a question bank that I store for future interviews. As you can see, these questions are actually pretty good. So tell me about improving employee engagement. Tell me about a time that you had to go through a difficult termination. What we're going to do just to give you a sense of how this might work on the other side, is take those questions that we've just created and ask if ChatGPT can help practice for an HR manager interview. So turning the tables completely, based on what you've just said, let's say maybe this handling a difficult termination question, we're going to copy that, paste it into the chat. So can you help me practice for this HR manager promotion interview? And once we pasted it in, GPT is going to give us an answer in the format of a star interview. I think what we should caveat this with is this is an example of how you should answer it. You probably shouldn't walk into an interview and claim that the answer that ChatGPT was actually an experience that you had. But as you can see from the text that has been created, this was a pretty reasonable sounding example of what a star interview should look like. Let's say that you've had your interview, or you've had a meeting and you want to write up the notes. Then what I'm now going to ask a different product. This is Google Gemini on my test account. So I'm now stepping away from ChatGPT, using Google Gemini, and I'm going to ask, can you please assist me in writing up my interview notes about a candidate into a standard format? So I've pasted in my interview notes. And if you're curious, these aren't real interview notes from somebody I interviewed. I got ChatGPT to create me fake interview notes. But you can see that what it's done is it's written out some notes that look reasonably scrappy, but reasonably realistic. And here is my formal set of notes from the interview that I took. What's really useful about this is because of the way that large language models are constructed, they're very good at summarizing text. And if we say, can you turn this into something more formal and structured, it will take your input and produce something that is more formal and structured. What I did here at the end was just say, from the notes, what are the 2 key takeaways that I can give to the candidate as constructive feedback? That's almost always a weakness as a interviewer or a hiring manager, of not really giving enough feedback to a candidate. And so one of the things that I did at the end there was just say, could you also please summarize that content for me? I mentioned in the last video that I created some demo data, in that case, my interview notes. But here, what I'm actually going to do is create some demo data so that I can run some analysis on it. So I've asked, in this case, Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, if it can create me some demo data, some dummy data for an organization of 20 people where I want certain fields. And so what it's doing here is it's creating me a table of 20 made up people. This means that I can run analysis on this data for you in front of this audience. But what it's doing is it's giving us this information, and it was enabling us to download that directly as an Excel sheet or paste it into something like Google Sheets as well. So let's look at that data. If we then open that data back up in Microsoft Excel, so this is where we actually want to work with the data. What I might want to do is take that data and ask some questions about it with a large language model. What I'm doing there is making sure that I don't take names, which we'll discuss later. So I'm taking the other information, and this time I'm going to paste it back into ChatGPT. So I'm giving it a prompt first that's letting the model know what I want to do. Here is some data about my company. For this data, can you tell me how many people are in each department? And I'm just going to paste in that data that we had in Excel straight into ChatGPT. So what it's able to do from this is give me immediately an analysis of the data that we had. I can also, if I'm not satisfied just with the text coming back as a set of answers, I can actually ask it to create me a graph, which is done here. And quite importantly, because of this concern about hallucinations, what we can see is that this isn't just creating an answer out of text, but it's actually created code to analyze the data that we put into it. And that code runs directly inside ChatGPT in this answer. I can also ask it more complex questions that aren't immediately available in the data, like what is the average salary across all of the employees and what's the total salary bill? This takes a little bit longer to run in the background because, again, it's actually running that code. But when it comes back, hopefully it will give us an answer of what is the average salary and what is the total salary bill. So here we go. It has answered us the average salary of each employee is $71,000. It's assumed dollars. And the total salary bill is $1.4 million. I also want to carry out some a little bit more analysis. So let's say I want to look at my diversity. So can you show me the split of employees by gender? Obviously, we have lots of reporting tools that can do this, but the beauty of a large language model is it's so capable across so many different fields that we can mix and match data from different sources and ask it questions about it. So here it's given me both the bar chart and a pie chart of gender, which, because it was dummy data, was perfectly 50-50 split. I do want to talk about one more thing, though, which is with the same data. I've talked about hallucination, and I'd like to just touch briefly on how we can use ChatGPT or other large language models with other tools. One of the things that I'm doing here is with that same ChatGPT instance that we were just asking about the data, I want to analyze the data in a different tool. So rather than just sticking inside the large language model itself, where its ability to do analysis is a little bit limited, I've asked it if it can write some code for a product called Google Colab, which for the techies in the audience is a type of Jupyter notebook that is run in a browser. So I will show you that in a second, but you can see that it's actually creating some fairly complex code. We don't have very many data points here, but effectively what I'm asking it to do is do some predictive analysis, or actually a linear regression, so some proper maths, and it's writing the code for that, which has been created here. When it's finished being created, I'm going to copy that, paste it directly into Google Colab, and you'll be able to see this much more complex data analysis. So here it's explaining what it's doing. It's doing a linear regression, it's doing a line plot, it's doing some predictive analytics, and we can take that code, copy it, take it into a different browser window, paste it. This is Google Colab, so we can paste the code into Google Colab here. This is an online version of effectively a data science tool. We'll be running this code that would be familiar to data scientists. Again, you don't need to understand all of these things. What we're really showing is that you can do very complex calculations, but working alongside a large language model rather than directly inside it. So we've pasted the code in. This will take just a little while for it to load. And here we go. This is the analysis of the data that we gave it for the employees, their years of experience and their salaries, and a prediction. So first the line chart, and then some statements about what the predicted salary of their users would be. Sorry, their employees would be. So you can see here, there is some correlation, some prediction of what the salary would look like as tenure with the company grows. But that's all a bit technical. So I thought it would be worth looking at some of the other things that large language models can do. The first of which is we're going to get it to create us some abstract art for our wall. So I'm asking if, in this case, ChatGPT can create me some abstract art. That's the prompt that I've given it. I'm also telling it what our company colors are. So Seeto's blue is cornflower. I've given it the hex code, and I'm uploading our logo. And that's it. And I'm just letting it go with this. And I could do it again and again and get different outputs. In fact, I ran this prompt many times, got a lot of different outputs. This was actually one of my favorites. So you'll see it generating the image in the background. And it can do it with all types of things. So it can just be simple images, but increasingly you're seeing it able to generate mock-ups for websites. I also wanted to talk a little bit about how this works alongside your employees, your team, as effectively as a Copilot. This is Microsoft Copilot, but how it can work to help train your team, to help people get more effective. I use this kind of thing all of the time when I don't fully understand a tool that I'm working with. So what I've done here is I've taken that same data that we were working with, in this case in Excel, and I want to run a correlation. I wanted to use Excel to show me if there is a correlation, in this case between years of experience and salary. So I'm pasting the formula that ChatGPT just wrote in here. You can see that equals Corel, GGHH. So it's helped me write a formula for Excel. But that's a pretty simple example. Let me show you how it can actually write something a little bit more complex. I've asked it if it can give me a formula that, instead of showing me the correlation, the actual output of the equation, it can say strong correlation, some correlation, or no correlation. So it's not a particularly useful formula, but it is more complex than the last one. So I'll paste that in, and you can see that what Excel is saying for the data that we've got is there is some correlation between the years of experience and salary. And you can see it's written a fairly complex formula, but it can help with things like pivot tables, even more complex formulas than this, or even just how to use common office tools. So if you want to know potentially how to use Excel or Word or PowerPoint better, it will be able to help you with those things. I know that we have a few people from a business development or a sales background in the audience. And so what I wanted to do was give you an example of how this can be useful outside of some of those other disciplines, in this case, particularly for creating what some people call a taxi pack for sales. So I need to pitch my software as a service product, which helps manage software costs, to my former employer, Reed. So I've asked it, what should I know about the leadership, the competitors, the market of Reed that might be appropriate to selling them as software as a service? What this has done is it has gone and looked online, and you saw just there that it is showing you, and I particularly asked it, show me your sources. So in this case, Copilot is excellent at showing the sources that it brought the data from. You can see the links on the screen there. And I'm specifically asking, what should I be talking to the customer about when I'm in this situation? What are the things that I should focus on when I'm having that sales conversation? Obviously, it doesn't replace good sales training, but it's a really good way to do some quick research about a customer. And in this case, what the large language models are getting better at is showing they're working. So rather than the possibility of seeing a hallucination where it looks like a very confident answer, we can actually go and check where it's pulling that information from to make sure that it's correct. Here I'm saying, what from all the information you've just given me, what are the top 3 points that I should talk to Reed about? And it's summarizing down that content that it created before and saying you should talk about cost efficiency and savings. Now, we're almost at the end. One of the things that some of you in the audience might know is I'm currently writing a book, so that means that I spend a lot of my time doing research, and I use large language models a lot to do my research. This is an example of an academic paper. So I wanted something that's quite long, very dense, quite technical. So this is an academic paper on remote working and effectiveness, team effectiveness. What I'm going to do here is upload that long document. So we're now seeing that these models have much greater context windows. That means the length of information that you can put into them. Much bigger context windows. We can now upload entire books if we need to with tools like Claude. I've uploaded that entire paper and said, can you provide me a quick summary of the key takeaways from this document? This is an amazing use case for large language models. If you want to know broadly about the contents of a book, or you want to follow on with some ideas about research, they're incredibly helpful to help you in situations where you need to summarize data down in something that you can consume much more quickly. So I've asked it first summarize that paper, and then what other research or authors might I investigate in this field? It's suggesting a number of authors from what it knows about, because remember, it was trained on enormous quantities of information, and number one, it suggested the work of Nicholas Bloom. What I have not entirely sensibly suggested afterwards is, that's great. So I can look at Nicholas Bloom. Can you summarize his entire research into a haiku? So a very short form poem. And here we can see that Claude has summarized that entire document down into an extremely creative haiku. This is the last example that I'll show you. I did want to give you an example of how some of these models, in fact, almost all of the models, can help write actual code. We saw this a little bit with the Google Colab example, but let me show you how it can build an entire, albeit small application, but a small and working application. So it's nearly time to book the Seeto Christmas party. I'm asking Claude if it can help me create a web page in HTML and JavaScript, and I've given it a steer of what I want that to look like. Particularly, I want the application to use our Seeto cornflower blue as the background. Here what you can see is it's actually writing some HTML code, then it's writing some JavaScript, and what it's going to show us is a working web application inside Claude that has falling snow. I'm not actually that happy with the speed of the snow. It looks a little bit more like a British winter with rain falling. So I'm saying to it now that snow is moving a bit fast. Can you make it more gentle, more dense, and build up at the bottom of the screen, which is quite a complex thing for it to do. And so here it's rewriting the code that it just gave me. And it's going to take a little while to do that. But hopefully what we will see before the end of the video is an improved version of that first application that it wrote. Here we go. It's a little bit more snowy. Whether it was building up on the bottom, we unfortunately don't have time to see. And that was it. That was a group of different demos, different examples of how you might use uh, any of these large language models in your work. You will find that they are all different. But one of the things that we would definitely say to you from our perspective, from a Seeto perspective, is you should definitely be exploring with these things and encouraging that exploration inside your business. So a few do's and don'ts. You should try a number of different tools and give yourself time to play around with the tools. Don't necessarily think specifically about how you're going to use it at work. You should ask questions beyond what you think might be reasonable. It's really interesting to note that these tools constantly surprise me, and I use them every day in a number of different ways, and they are constantly surprising me in their capability, which is moving incredibly fast. So large language model this week is more capable than the same model appeared to be last week. If you're curious about how you might use it in the context of your work and you're a little bit cautious about putting your own information in, one of the nice ways that you can get around not putting your own privileged company information in is ask, what do you know about my company? So we might ask, what do you know about Seeto? And then you can ask it with that information, what should Seeto's strategy be, and see what it comes out. You should also find out if anybody within your organization is already actively using the tools. You should certainly ask inside your marketing and growth teams, because they are most likely to be using them in creative ways. You'll also find that a number of tools are already including generative AI inside the product that people have access to today. A few things that you shouldn't do, especially when you are trialing these things, you should not enter personally identifiable information. So that's even things like company email addresses count as personally identifiable information. You shouldn't add any privileged company information into any of the tools unless you're sure it's safe. If you're not sure, it's probably not, but do go and ask your IT team, your technical team, if there is a tool that is available to you. Also, in a similar note, you shouldn't connect tools to work systems. So for example, inside ChatGPT, you may have seen it in some of the examples that we looked at, you can connect that to Google Drive. If you connect that to your work Google Drive without permission, it could have access to things that your company is not happy that they would be exposing that information. Now let's talk quickly about the tools that you might choose. And again, we're talking very specifically about large language models from the major providers. So we're not talking about a lot of the nuance and detail of the wider ecosystem that is out there, but we're going to talk about some of the tools that you might find useful. In very simple terms, if you ask us at Seeto for advice about how to implement these tools, we will probably give you at the top level a very, very simple piece of guidance. If you are using Google Workspace, then you should probably look at using Google Gemini. If you are using Microsoft Office, so things like Outlook and Word and PowerPoint, then you should probably think about using Microsoft Copilot. If you want the most cutting edge features and you are confident in your ability to review the terms and conditions, the privacy policies of other providers, then we would definitely recommend that you look at Claude from Anthropic or ChatGPT from OpenAI. They are both fantastic tools, and Claude and ChatGPT tend to have the most cutting edge features earlier than the features from Google and Microsoft. So in broad terms, it's a bit safer to use the tools from the vendors that you're already using. But if you want to be really cutting edge, you can look at the other tools. There is a lot more detail to it than that, but please ask us if you have any questions about it. I do want to bust some myths very quickly on data privacy and security. You may hear that people are concerned that your information will be used to train the large language models, or that using them isn't safe. From both Microsoft and Google, you should do your own research. I'm not getting you off the hook for doing your own research, but these are the latest copies from the Microsoft and Google websites about the security and privacy commitments that they make to their users. And in broad terms, what both of these policies from Microsoft and Google say is they provide the same security around Google Gemini and Microsoft Copilot as you would find if you were using Microsoft 365, so Outlook or PowerPoint or Google Workspace. The other thing that they claim very, very specifically in here is not only is the wrapper of security equivalent for the large language model tools that they are providing, but also they explicitly claim that your inputs are never being used to train the models, which obviously is very important to you. That again is why we're saying if you just want to do your procurement quite quickly and you want a sense of safety, Microsoft and Google are the most obvious choices. Let's now have a look at how much this might cost you inside your business. My co-founder Laurene published earlier this year a fantastic article breaking down the relative costs of how much it might cost to use Google Workspace and some of the tools that are common in that stack versus Microsoft 365. What you will find is that they broadly cost you just the basic tools that you use. So this is email, some of your document tools, basic collaboration tools that might include something like Notion. On the Microsoft side, that would include SharePoint and OneDrive, but broadly you are paying per user per month in your organization between £25 and £40 per head. That's without AI. Now, if you add AI onto that, that cost rises quite significantly. It goes up to about £50 to £65 per month. So it's an increase roughly around £16 to £25, depending on the tool that you're using, per user per month. So it's almost double, maybe not quite double, but it's a fairly significant increase on what you'll be paying. So you absolutely should be thinking about what the impact of buying this is for your organization. But let's put that into context. If you're working in a 50-person business, then making one of these leading AI tools available to every team member that you have would cost you about £15,000 per year. That's not a number to be sniffed at. But if you believe, having looked at this, that it can improve some of your productivity and effectiveness from your team members, your annual salary bill absolutely at the bottom of the window that we might estimate this at. So using average salaries across the UK for 50 people without on costs, it's about £1.75 million. So if you think that it's going to save you some time, that is the number that you need to properly compare it with, about how much extra productivity and efficiency am I going to get from team members. But obviously remember, it doesn't replace anyone. It is a tool to make them more productive. Now, let's just very quickly look at how you might begin your AI journey. So we've seen what it is, what it does. We've seen a little bit about how much it costs. So let's have a look at how we might roll this out. Well, first, it's really important that you draft your AI policy. And the AI policy isn't just something that is there for compliance. And I know that there will be people cringing in the audience thinking about yet another piece of compliance. The AI policy is really important because this is the document that will help your staff understand how they can use these tools, what is and what isn't appropriate. So you should define your scope. So you should choose where AI can be used inside your business. You should establish your guardrails. So what are the rules about how team members can use AI responsibly? And that's thinking about how they can keep themselves and the company safe. You should also check, obviously, on regional and industry compliance requirements. So thinking about, if let's say that you're in the financial services industry, you may be FCA or PRA regulated. You may need to abide by GDPR, and you almost certainly will. So you need to think about, from an AI policy point of view, how do you reflect those commitments from the wider organization into the AI policy? You should focus on training. So when you think about this policy, make sure it's understandable for your team members and it helps them understand what they need to know about how to use AI tools. You should define how you're going to monitor the processes that you've put in place. So how do I keep track of AI use? And again, one of the things about responsibly adopting AI is so that you can get a better grasp around the use of it inside the organization. You should schedule regular policy reviews. For the AI policy, AI is moving incredibly quickly. So don't just assume that once you've written the policy, it's done. Put a date in the diary about 6 months from now when you can review it and improve it. Now, around the AI policy, we'll talk about this a bit later, but Seeto has a draft template that we're very happy to share with you. So if you get in touch with us after the webinar today, we'll be very happy just to share that template with you to get you started on the journey. Of course, speaking about the policy is one thing, but thinking about how it's used inside the organization by real people is the most important thing. One of the things that you will find is that there are already people inside the organization that are passionate about it and already using it, even if it is in their personal lives. These tools are really, really, really powerful. They are less predictable than other types of technology. So more than any other tool, it's really important that people understand how they can use them. So you need to really think about staff training and awareness. Because they're so easy to use, it might not feel like it's important, but it's even more important. So people can slip into using them, but they may not understand the significance, the importance of what they're doing and potential misuse. Make sure that your team members have really clear and visible guidance about what they should and shouldn't do, but embrace the curiosity and the creativity of your own team members. Put your people first. Your team are going to be the people that come up with all of the creative ways that have the most powerful impacts on your business. Make sure that you consider the risk for your own business, but also that of your customers. You are probably part of a supply chain. So you're not just keeping yourself safe with this, but you're also keeping all of the people that rely on you safe by making sure that you implement AI tools responsibly. Things that you should plan to avoid, not just the things that you should do. You will almost certainly find that people are using their own personal accounts and often free accounts as well. And if you're not aware of what their use is, and if those team members aren't trained properly, they may not be aware of the risk that they are posing to the business. You may also find a slightly different version of the same thing is that departments are actually buying in tools that you don't know about. So marketing teams are generally extremely good at going out and finding these new tools, and they're very good at putting them on the company credit card. That's something we call shadow IT. That's where a department without full guidance or governance from the main organization is adopting technology. And we obviously want to try to avoid that. So do go out and provide better alternatives. Really the name of the game in avoiding shadow IT is to make sure that you find out the needs of your users and you provide them with something better than they could provide themselves. But also don't use blanket bans on AI technology. Don't just say you cannot use any generative AI, because that prevents some of the creative use and the exploration that your team members will do. So your team are already using GenAI. Sometimes they may be sanctioned to use it, but quite a lot of the time they probably won't. We definitely recommend to our customers that you take a don't trust, always verify approach to Gen AI. We do that across the board with almost all security. It used to be slightly different, but now it is don't trust, always verify. So try to create a carefully considered environment for your staff to embrace these technologies as well as others. Rolling out generative AI is definitely a process, and we want to give you some of the tips that we've learned from working with our customers about how you might go about this. And unsurprisingly, it looks like almost any digital transformation project where you are rolling out a new tool. First, understanding your AI readiness as a business. Where are you now? How is it being used? Is it already rolled out? Do you have an AI policy? Once you have understood that baseline, you want to identify who your early adopters are, who the initial evangelists are. They will become really important later. Then, once you have identified who these early users are, you want to identify where it might be valuable inside your business. Where do you think you're going to get value? And if you don't know, then use those early adopters to give you some ideas about it. Then define your policy, as we've just talked about, so that you have those guardrails to explain both to the early adopters and later as you roll out throughout the organization. Once you have a policy, you can decide which tool you want to use, first for the pilot and later, if you're comfortable with it, for the full rollout. Then you're going to appoint your champions. This is something we find incredibly powerful when we're managing this kind of change project at Seeto. You find people inside the business that are passionate and want to help other people learn. When you found those champions, you then want to get them to lead the organization in thinking about how it might be useful in the future. Run an organizational show and tell. So maybe get those champions to come and demonstrate to the organization how they're using it in their workflow. And then make sure that you are training the champions in how they can support other people, so they really know what the AI policy looks like and what the training material is. Build excitement, make sure that people know this is coming, get them excited it's coming, not something to be scared of, make them feel supported. Train everyone, make sure that they understand where the policy is, where any training materials are, and then when you've done those things, then you get your organization-wide rollout, potentially department by department. If you want to discuss any details of how you might roll this type of change out inside your organization, do get in touch with us and we will be happy to talk you through it. We'll come to questions in a moment, but very quickly, just a reminder of ways that we at Seeto can help. So there are three main ways. You can get in touch with us, just ask us after the event. We'll leave some contact us information in the last slide. Contact us for your copy of the Seeto AI policy template. So we've looked at that, we've reviewed it, we are comfortable with it as your baseline, your foundation document to create your own, and we're happy to share that with you. Just get in touch with us. If you'd like to talk about Seeto's advisory services, that's where we can help you with a specific project to roll a piece of technology out. It could be generative AI. It could be, let's say, moving from Microsoft to Google or Google to Microsoft. Those are advisory services that we provide. We can also talk you through our AI readiness health check, which is something that we have run with our customers. And if you're interested in the wider support services that Seeto provides, what we call our concierge service, where we support all of the business technology inside your organization, then get in touch with us and we can talk through how we optimize productivity, employee experience, and security with our customers and potentially for you. And now we're going to head over to questions. Hopefully we can bring in Laurene and Phil, who you met earlier, into the call. And hi, Phil. Hi, Laurene. How you doing?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, really
I
good.
believe you've been watching the questions as we've been going.
We have, yeah. Firstly, please do share the code for the C2 Christmas party. We'll be needing that very soon. It was very impressive. So we've had a few questions in the chat. So what we can do is start with the first one. So there's a question from Alice who says, "How do I ensure Gen AI fits into my company's long-term goals?" Don't all jump at
Who
once.
do you want to answer that?
Mark, do you want to take a stab at that?
I can try it. Hi, Alice. Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But what I would say is these Gen AI tools, as you've seen today, have a lot of different use cases. They can help lots of different roles in lots of different teams. And that's part of the beauty of them. They're incredibly powerful across a huge number of use cases. So if we were talking about something that was more targeted, so potentially something like a marketing automation tool, then it would be easier to say, is marketing automation a big part of the future of your organization? But with generative AI tools, they have such a broad scope of usefulness that really what you're saying is, when you look at the examples we've just seen, is, are there ways that this could be useful across the organization for people to be more effective in their roles? They're not going to completely replace people. They are going to help people do their jobs more easily, potentially adopt other tools more quickly. And so what I would say is this is part of an ongoing improvement in your organization, supporting your staff in being more productive. And I think I would struggle to think that any organization wouldn't want to see productivity gains from their employees.
Excellent, thank you. So we've got a few more from Alice, and then we've got a few from Terry and Rachel. So another question from Alice is, should we be concerned about issues with copyright when using Gen AI tools? Phil, do you want to, it might be a bit more of a collaborative one, but Phil, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, happy to jump in. I think it's a really good question. There's been a fair amount in the news. I know there's an ongoing lawsuit, I think in the States, of a number of artists who are concerned about their artworks being used as training data for some of these large language models. And so it's a very valid concern. What I would say is, if you're going through the procurement process for a tool such as Gemini or Microsoft's Copilot, consider how the vendors are offering indemnities. So some of these vendors will have either insurance-backed indemnities or other sorts of indemnities that you can rely on in terms of using the content that they're creating in publicly available assets, whether that's imagery or text. I would also say, have a robust review process. If you look at it and you go, I think we might be treading a little bit too much on McDonald's IP. If you're writing some sort of article about fast food, for instance, then that's probably, you need the human gateway there to say, yeah, we're probably flying a little bit too close to the wind here, and we probably want to take a step back and maybe generate something a little bit different. And that goes for text content as well. You can't just use it verbatim, as we've seen with some of the articles that are out there on the internet, where it says, if you would like some more information, perhaps you should ask us another query. And you think, yeah, that's clearly coming out of AI. So slightly different concern there to copyright, but equally the same approach solves two potential issues. Is there anything you want to add, Mark?
That was an amazing and very complete answer. For me, just to back what Phil said, it really is all about the procurement and training people within the company to know how to use it. So these language models will proliferate, they will improve. Those are very, very interesting court cases, especially the ones in the US, are extremely interesting to watch. The best thing that you can do is choose well-regarded vendors who have generally been more responsible. But that doesn't mean that you can just pick a big name and assume that it's going to be fine. So Phil's question dealt with a lot of the complexity and the nuances under that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we've got another one. How can we ensure the safety and confidentiality of our data in GenAI? I think that might be another one for you, Phil.
Feels like I'm in the hot seat. So there are a number of issues at play here, and I think the key one comes back to what Mark touched on earlier, which is are your team, are the people that you're responsible for using free offerings, or are they using an offering that you've gone down a procurement path for? The answer differs quite substantially between the two. So typically, if you're looking at the free offerings, you're not paying money for those services, but what you are paying is by providing your data to further train the models. So you do need to be very careful about what data you're inputting, particularly in these freely available solutions. That's not necessarily the same for the paid solutions, and I would absolutely tell you to go and read the terms and conditions. This is one time where you should not be clicking through and saying everything will be fine. One thing to note is there are a number of different kind of paid for ChatGPT tiers. Some of them, I think it's team and above, don't reuse the data that you enter for training, whereas there is a paid tier that does. So that is something that could potentially catch you out. Beyond that, it's just about having good training, so your team understands what's acceptable, what data can be input into the large language model, into the GenAI tools, and also potentially obfuscating or removing personally identifiable data, confidential information, and to some degree your IP. However, I caveat that because there are going to be tools out there where actually you might want it looking at, for instance, your application code.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a question from Rachel. Rachel wants to know, do you have any good AI policy templates? And I think we know the answer to that one. I believe we do.
We are particularly proud of our template, Generative AI policy. And
Phil wrote our policy template, and Phil is amazing at writing policy templates. So yes, we do, and we're happy to share it with anyone on the call.
Happy to share it for you. Yeah, with obviously no obligation. I think that also needs to be said.
Okay, I think we've got time for, we've got a few more, so I think we're okay for now. I'm going to keep an eye on time so I don't run over. So we've got a message from Terry. Terry asks, is there a need for some ability to audit the activity that is being put through a company AI review process? My thinking here is a way of ensuring the tools are being used correctly, that there is no misuse, either accidentally or on purpose.
The first place that I would go is training first, not to diminish the importance of that question, and almost to circle back a little bit on what Phil was just saying about, is this secure? Something that I'm particularly aware of, and this isn't just GenAI, this is almost for any tool, is that where people have started using bits of technology on their own, it is almost always much more secure for you to organizationally find out that is happening and provide an alternative. So today, you will find that almost all of your staff are curious and are maybe using these things on their own, and may have done something as simple as, I've taken some meeting notes and put it into the free version of ChatGPT, because they haven't been trained to know that that isn't an appropriate use of the technology, but also because they don't have an alternative. So the first thing that I would say is, it's really important as these things become more prolific, as people start to have more access to them outside of work, that you say, well, these things are being used, so we need an alternative. So the first thing that I would say is, make sure that they have the alternative, make sure that they are well trained in what is a good or bad use case of it. So that's where you start. And then to Terry's question in particular, certainly at Seeto, we love audits. We love auditing whether people are getting into tools, whether they're using them. We've seen a number of our customers use tools that can identify whether bits of software are being bought based on their credit card use. There is a very particular almost caveat that I would give is, yes, Terry, we would love to see the usage, but it's going to be very dependent on the tool that you buy. And you will almost certainly have to buy a tool to get access to those usage logs. So because we now have very remote organizations, it's very difficult for us to control in the way that we used to when we had a central office that could watch everybody's internet traffic, because all of these things are available on a browser, they're available on personal mobile devices. It's very difficult to control the network perimeter to say what people can or can't use, or observe what they can or can't use. So part of this procurement is you should be looking at those tools, and this is probably where you will start finding that the big two, Google and Microsoft, have more ability to analyze the usage. But even then, you are probably unlikely to be able to go in and really analyze exactly how an individual is looking at it, because they're probably not storing information at that level for you to go and interrogate the conversations that are happening. But I would start with procurement, providing alternatives, making sure there is good training, and then think about observability of how the tool's being used. But that's my take, Phil. I don't know from a security perspective if there are things you'd like to add.
I completely agree with you. I think there's another way of looking at it, which is actually, are there particular behaviors that you want to stop? And going back to your point about there are add-on solution services that offer, I guess, guardrails. If you're particularly concerned because your team works with, I don't know, national insurance numbers, some sort of data loss prevention type application could potentially stop those details being input into Gen AI tools. But again, touching on your point around perimeter, that would be on the devices you control, and certainly isn't going to stop somebody taking data out of your organization and popping it onto a personal mobile phone. Hopefully you would have policies that would have some fairly severe consequences for doing something like that. So you need to have a layered approach, I think, is the response that we're kind of leaning towards.
Okay, thank you both. We've got 6 minutes, so I think that we'll take the last two questions. So this one, how can we make the most of Gen AI while respecting human creativity and expertise? Mark?
Oh, thanks, Laurene. I was hoping you can give that one to Phil. Now it's such a pertinent question, especially when you see Phil mentioned some of those the lawsuits that are happening in the US now around creativity around the music industry. I was actually reading another article directly about that earlier today. I also work with a lot of news organizations, and that's another area of real concern about these large language models being trained on things like news articles, on books, novels. So there are lots of concerns about the creative output of humans being used to train them, but that's also a really important point around, is it going to impact the creativity of people? I think there is still something magical about human creativity that large language models haven't been able to reproduce yet. I do think that all of the large language models we've seen today are exceptional companions to enable people, especially when you are not so expert in something, to do something easily, which you weren't able to do before. So in a way that can actually enhance your creativity. So as an example, I am a terrible artist, but I've created some generative AI art that I'm really proud of, that I think looks fantastic, and I would never have been able to do that before. So in a sense, that it can enhance the creativity of individuals as well as take it away. I do think, and this is something that I spoke with the Seeto team about recently, was I do think that there is a concern about the overuse of a tool, which is sometimes you need to think about using the large language model for something that you're okay but not brilliant at. Every time you use an LLM to do that, let's say I want it to write an email for me, so I will just get the LLM to write the email. It's taking away an opportunity to practice. And humans need lots of opportunities to practice because we're not large language models. So I think there is an element in the training that when you speak to your organization and you say this is when you should be using it, actually explaining, make sure you leave time to still do the difficult things, use it as a companion to learn, and leave yourself space for creativity. There is no easy answer, because we will see all of these generative AI tools get better at all of the things they're already doing, and they will become more convincing. But that doesn't mean that humans can't be equally, if not more creative on their own without the large language model in the background. But it's just a tool. It won't go away, and it will definitely help the productivity and the effectiveness of people inside the organization.
Okay, that's brilliant. And also that was a nice nod to Craig's second question around addressing concerns about employees essentially, leaning too much into Gen AI and not necessarily developing themselves. See it as a companion, another teammate, and develop from there. So we have got 3 minutes, so we probably want to start to wrap this up. So I'll go ahead and do that. Firstly, thank you so much for joining today. We really hope that you found this webinar valuable and enjoyed it. If you do have any lingering questions that you haven't had a chance to ask, please do get in touch with us. I believe you have, there you go, brilliant. So there is obviously these are the ways that you can get in touch with us. So we are available on email. So hello@seeto.co.uk via our website, or you can connect with us on LinkedIn. And also there is the template policy that Phil is very proud of, that we would be happy to share with you all. So thank you so much. And also a big thank you to the Seeto team and Jack in the background, who you haven't seen, but he's our producer and he's done an excellent job of helping us make this a success. So thank you so much.